Welcome to the Mini Book Podcast, African American Books Edition. Today we are looking at The Half Has Never Been Told, Slavery and the Making of American Capitalism by Edward E. Baptist. We thank you for listening, and please consider subscribing for future content. After hearing this podcast, we would encourage you to go out and purchase this book and support the author. The voices you hear come from AI, but the content comes straight from the book. But we feel that this is a great way to learn about African American history. So for you, the listener, I want to pose a challenge right out of the gate. I want you to completely set aside everything you thought you knew about the American economy.
Right, the standard narrative.
Yeah, exactly. The standard narrative we all learned in grade school. We're taught that the United States became this global economic superpower strictly through, northern industrial ingenuity.
Sure.
Factories, the free market, all of that.
And that the South was...
Just this backward, pre-modern, basically dying aristocratic society. But what if the history books completely lied to you about how the United States actually became a superpower? Because today we are exploring a really explosive central premise from the book. Baptist argues that slavery was absolutely not a dying or inefficient system.
Not at all.
No. It was a ruthlessly calculated, highly advanced capitalist machine that essentially built the modern world.
It really did. And the sheer scale of this text is just incredible. We're exploring the hidden economic engine of America. The author uses an enormous amount of historical records to show how the forced migration and the commodification of 1 million people fueled the Industrial Revolution.
Oh, we should probably break down that word right away. Commodification.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, when we talk about commodification here, we are talking about turning human beings into products with the price tag.
It's chilling.
It really is. Literally transforming living, breathing people into financial assets. Their bodies were used as collateral for huge loans, and their future labor was actually securitized on global financial markets. Recognizing that they were treated purely as capital is, well, it's the only way to truly understand how the foundations of modern American wealth were laid.
To really grasp how this history was hidden from us for so long, I want you to picture something. Just picture yourself sitting on a wooden porch in Virginia.
Okay.
The year is 1937. You're a young government interviewer named Claude Anderson, sent to record the memories of an elderly, formerly enslaved man named Lorenzo Ivy. And you have this government-issued notepad, and on it is a list of these highly sanitized, frankly insulting questions.
Like, were you happy in slavery?
Exactly. Or, was the mansion house pretty? Just totally missing the reality. So Claude is sitting there trying to stick to this sanitized script. But Lorenzo Ivy, he just refuses to play along with this romanticized version of the past.
That is such a pivotal moment in the book. Ivy completely ignores the sanitized questions and reveals this outrageous reality to the interviewer. He talks about a terrifying phenomenon that he calls cotton fever.
Cotton fever, yeah.
He explains how white enslavers caught this fever, which was basically this manic obsession to move to the Deep South, grow cotton, and get rich. And to feed that frenzy, they completely tore apart families.
Just ruthless.
Utterly ruthless. Ivy recounts how husbands were separated from wives, children were torn away from their parents, just swept up in this massive relocation purely for profit. And then he looks at the young interviewer and says the line that gives the book its title.
Truly, son, the half has never been told.
Exactly, the half has never been told.
It gives you chills. It really makes you wonder how that other half of the story was suppressed for so many decades. And the book unpacks this perfectly. It explains how textbooks and historians intentionally whitewashed slavery for generations.
Mm-hmm.
They promoted this massive myth known as paternalism.
Right, we definitely need to break down paternalism for the listener.
Yeah, so paternalism is basically this false idea, this PR campaign, that enslavers acted like strict but caring fathers to supposedly inferior people who needed their guidance.
Which is just an absurd fiction.
Completely. It painted this picture of the Old South with leisurely plantation owners and contented workers sipping drinks on the porch.
And Baptist just completely dismantles that myth. He clarifies that this idea of paternalism was intentionally created to hide the brutal, profit-driven reality of the Old South. The author argues that the South wasn't old or traditional at all. It was actually a rapidly expanding modern frontier.
Highly organized.
Very. The men running these labor camps weren't leisurely feudal lords. They were aggressive, modern entrepreneurs tracking yields and making calculated decisions to extract maximum wealth from forced labor.
Speaking of that brutal reality, I have a question for you, the listener. Could you survive walking 1.5 million steps?
Wow, 1.5 million.
Yeah. That is roughly 700 miles.
Right.
Now, I want you to imagine walking that distance while chained at the neck and wrists to 30 other people. Think about the sheer horror of that forced march.
It's almost unimaginable.
The physical exhaustion, the terror, the agonizing realization that every step pulls you further away from everything you've ever loved. This was not dystopian fiction.
No, it was daily reality. Between the 1790s and 1860s, 1 million African Americans were forcibly moved from the Old South to the new territories. And the text breaks down exactly how they were moved. They used a system called a coffle.
The coffle.
Right. A coffle was a terrifying human machine. Men were chained together in double lines, carrying up to 20 pounds of iron. They were marched alongside women and children like cattle toward the Mississippi Valley.
And what really shows the shocking reality of this market is the language used in the historical advertisements.
Yeah.
You look at these old newspapers in the book, and you see ads constantly calling for prime field hands. Just think about that terminology.
The author spends a lot of time on that. He shows how this language intentionally stripped away humanity. Calling someone a prime field hand reduces a complex human being to just a body part designed to pick cotton.
It totally distances the buyer from the reality.
Exactly. It hid the fact that these hands were terrified fathers, mothers, and children whose labor was literally being stolen to build an empire.
Which leads right into a really provocative claim from the book. What if the true pioneers of American capitalism weren't just the famous inventors in northern factories? What if the real architects of our modern economy were actually the architects of a massive, continent-spanning system of torture?
It forces you to completely rethink how global wealth was generated. The author links the physical bodies of the enslaved directly to the explosion of global capitalism.
Through the quota system, right?
Yes, the quota system. Enslavers realized they needed people to pick cotton faster and more efficiently every single day, so they used constant calibrated violence to enforce rising daily quotas. If you fell short of your specific weight by sundown, you were tortured.
It was a management tool.
A horrifyingly effective one. Because of this relentless violence, the South produced almost 2 billion pounds of cotton by 1860. 2 billion pounds.
That number is staggering, and the author's evidence shows you that this wasn't just a Southern problem. That is a huge misconception. That 2 billion pound cotton monopoly flowed straight up to the north. It fueled the massive textile factories in Connecticut.
It built Wall Street.
Yes, it fueled London banks and global maritime trade. The entire global economic system relied on this extracted wealth.
The author frames the entire United States as growing incredibly rich off this forced labor. The North built a complex, industrialized economy entirely dependent on that cheap cotton, and because of this massive influx of capital, America became the second nation in the world to undergo large-scale industrialization.
So when you process the scale of this giant calculating machine, you have to ask yourself, how do you keep your mind intact when the world has stolen your past, your family, and your future? I marvel at the psychological resilience the text details here.
It's profound. And they didn't just survive, they resisted. The author shows how they created their own underground history through their vernacular truth.
Let's break down the word vernacular for a second.
Sure. Vernacular just means the everyday language spoken by ordinary people in a particular region. So, around the nighttime fires in these labor camps, out of sight of the overseers, enslaved people consistently used a specific word to describe their reality. They used the word stole.
Stole.
Right. They weren't passive victims. They acutely understood the macroeconomic truth of their situation. They knew their lives and their labor were part of a giant calculated robbery.
And the details of what was stolen are just heartbreaking. The text shares accounts of children who were moved at such a young age that they actually forgot their own parents' names.
Oh, the records of that are just devastating.
There are accounts of children walking up to strangers in the new camps and asking, "Are you my mother?" They were intentionally erased by the market. But despite that erasure, they miraculously built a new shared culture out of that immense trauma.
They established a concrete baseline of solidarity. By sharing that vernacular truth, by sharing that trauma, they built a united understanding of the world that directly rejected the myths the enslavers tried to force on them.
And that cultural miracle brings us to something that impacts everyone today. Did you know that the foundation of almost all modern American popular music was forged as a desperate survival tactic in the absolute darkest labor camps of the 1800s?
It's an incredible realization.
Think about the music you listen to today. Rock, jazz, blues, hip-hop. This book traces it all back to these camps.
The author details how these enslaved migrants, who were thrown together from different African nations and various American states, combined their traditions to create something entirely new.
The syncopated rhythms.
Yes. The syncopated rhythms of the banjo and the fiddle. They had these Saturday night dances and these gatherings called corn shuckings. They were weaving diverse traditions into a brand new dialect and musical form.
But the author emphasizes that this wasn't just entertainment. It was a matter of survival. The book argues that stepping into the center of a singing ring to improvise a new step or a new lyric was a profound act of defiance.
In a system designed to make you an identical, replaceable hand, improvising art was reclaiming your stolen individuality.
Exactly. It was a defiant statement of humanity. It forged this unbreakable political and cultural solidarity among people who had everything else violently stripped away.
It really is a cultural miracle. And the author leaves us with an incredibly powerful metaphor to encapsulate all of this. It's actually inspired by the writer Ralph Ellison.
The trussed-up giant metaphor.
That's the one. Ellison suggested that American history is a drama enacted on the body of a trussed-up giant. The book shows that while enslavers and the global markets used the physical body of this giant to build global wealth, the enslaved were cultivating an invisible twin.
An invisible twin.
Right, a spirit, a voice, and a solidarity that outlived the chains. It was this invisible twin that survived the camps and eventually transformed the entire world through the civil rights movement and its massive cultural impact.
It's so powerful.
It really leaves you with a provocative question to mull over. What other hidden truths of our modern world were built on foundations we've been taught to ignore?
Please subscribe and tell others about this podcast. We also ask you to suggest in the comments books that you would like to hear in future episodes. Thank you for subscribing and listening.